Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 10th episode of the story in which Naruto accomplished the impossible. You cannot stop the flow of time. Its will only rotates in one direction. A mere human cannot change that path. This story is from Dorsey. Please support him, her. She is also a digital artist, so please visit her profile. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Naruto, standing behind his father, glanced around the enormous council chamber, which was currently occupied by the strongest people of the whole shinobi world. All of them were sitting behind their hat, each of them announcing where they came from. He eyed the still old and still wrinkled face of the Tsuchikage and Kitsuchi behind him, then his eyes moved toward the Kazekage, who acknowledged his attention with a small nod. His pools then traveled toward Yashimaru, who observed him with calm and calculating eyes. However, they were much softer than the last time. Then he turned his attention to the delegation of the mist. Suikazan Fuguki was even bigger than Kitsuchi, and Naruto could only see the hilt of Samehada strapped firmly on his back. Indeed, the member of the 7 swordsmen of the mist actually reminded him of a pufferfish. Beside him, the Mizukage looked like a small child. Yagura eyed him somewhat calculating and curiously, his pink eyes traveled between him and Minato from time to time. Lastly, he glanced up to the awkwardly young face of A, whose eyes were fixed on his father's form, sending sharp glares toward the also young leader. But Naruto paid most of his attention to the young man standing behind him with folded arms, so did this foreign shinobi eye him almost continuously. They stood there silently, each of them observing the other for their own reasons. B suddenly smirked at him, which kicked him out from the small world of his memories about the loud rapper. Shaking his head, he came back to reality with a wide grin on his face. However, almost everyone else in the room was tense beyond words beside the 2 Jinchuriki. The guards' hands were continuously next to 1 or 2 hidden weapons, while each of the Kage had been observing the other with calculating and even sometimes cold eyes. Only Minato and the Kazekage shared one glance which wasn't full of suspicion, or in the case some of them even with flaming hatred. But despite all of the hostile feelings, the eyes deep inside sparkled with a small hint of respect for each other's power and curiosity at what the hell is going to happen. The Tsuchikage's old and wrinkled eyes finally traveled toward Naruto's own and made a face at the sight of the 2 blondes. Naruto couldn't fight down the urge, he sent a wide smirk in response at the grimace. 1 yellow flash was already more than enough. And now, here is a damn clone of him. Anoki muttered through his gritted teeth. The named blonde rolled his cerulean eyes and waved a dismissive hand at the aging man. I'm no clone of anyone, GG. The Tsuchikage snorted angrily, even raising from his seat, however it didn't help him to gain any height. The only thing he managed was to raise the already heavy tension in the room to an almost unbearable level as killing intent started to flow freely from the small village leader. Repeat what you said if you dare, boy. I can still kick you to the afterlife with my arms secured behind my back. Anoki even tried to lean above the long desk to wait his threat toward the still grinning blonde boy, who didn't pick up the gloves. Minato let out a long and weary sigh, ran a hand through his golden locks, and opened his mouth to calm down the already pre-disaster mood. But the deep voice of the Raikage stopped him from doing so. The boy is right, Anoki. You are old. You should have retired ages ago. Just like the Sandaime. The killer intent raised even more, and one silent Anbu started to tremble like a leaf in one of the dark corners of the room. At least I don't look like a teenage boy who is trying to act like a Kage. Another wave of killer intent flashed from the direction of the until now stoic Mizukage, who also raised to his feet. Guards tensed until the breaking point behind their leaders, ready to defend them from any attacks. Hands hovered over hidden kunai, small katana ready to lash out in a blink of an eye if necessary. What did you just say, you living fossil? The Mizukage hissed, making the named fossil to jump on the table with one graceful movement, giving a lie to the previous statement about his old age. Only Kitsuchi's hand on his shoulders restrained the Tsuchikage from rushing to the other side of the room where Yagura was seated. A deep snort echoed all around the room, making all heads turn toward the smirking Raikage. I always loved free circuses. Don't bother yourself, continue. I'll just watch. Everybody calm down. All heads snapped toward the now annoyed Minato, whose voice echoed back and forth inside the chamber just like the Raikage's beforehand. The heavy air hung in the silent room threateningly, just like a guillotine above a condemned head. But all of the tension suddenly disappeared as Naruto couldn't stand the scene anymore and burst out with barking laughter. Do you think it's funny, boy? The Tsuchikage snarled with irritation, his eyes narrowing into slits, deepening the wrinkles around his eyes even more. Yeah. Actually, it is hilarious. You were bickering like small kids. Naruto choked out between two fits of laughter. You aren't helping me. Minato muttered behind his gritted teeth, slowly shaking his head. But, after one last glance around the room, he had to admit that he was utterly wrong. The tension disappeared together with the pre-disaster mood. Despite all the eyes shining with irritation, the previous hatred toward the others was gone as they observed his relative, more curiously than threateningly. Naruto's chuckle finally died down slowly and he wiped the small tears from the corner of his eyes. Everything was so nostalgic. Their argument, their bickering. Just like when they got together in Suna after the first battle with the Jubi. Even as they were allies back then, they couldn't suppress the urge to insult each other just like small children on the playground would do over a toy or candy. Power demonstration between the village. Leaders by pure instinct. It must be coded into the DNA of every leader or something. Minato-san is right. Act your age and stop insulting each other. We are here to talk, not to fight. The Kazekage spoke for the first time, making Anoki narrow his eyes even more. The Raikage snorted before he opened his mouth to retort. Since when is the Hokage only Minato-san to you, Kazekage-sama? Did you become Konoha's pet? Do you even frisk your tail and bow to him? The stern and stoic expression never left the fourth leader of Suna as he answered. Only one almost invisible twitch of his eyes hinted at his irritation. Minato-san and his brother provided a great service to Suna. I will bow to anyone who deserves my respect, Kage or not. The Mizukage slowly sat down, his rose-tinted eyes observed the stern ones of the Kazekage curiously and with well-hidden confusion. What kind of service did Konoha give to you, Kazekage-sama? The named leader eyed the young shinobi for a long silent minute, weighing his thoughts before he answered. They fixed the seal of Suna's Jinchuriki, and with it, saving the life of not only the vessel, but it seems most likely the lives of my citizens. The seal was weak, letting Shikaku control the Jinchuriki's mind. Who knows what could have happened if Konoha had not intervened? Silence fell among the lines of the leaders, each of them processing the information the Kazekage had just given them. Thoughts raced inside their heads, gears moved continuously. A disbelieving snort filled the room, interrupting the silence. Anoki slowly sat down and leaned back in his seat, folding his arms together as he eyed the two blondes across the room. Why would they do that? What did you offer them for it? The bijou, I assume. You offered the power of your tailed beast in exchange? Naruto clenched his hands into fists and stepped forward, making the guards tense once more, and the four Kage to shift their attention to him. But in the end, it was Minato who opened his soft lips and answered with a calm tone, his chin casually resting on his folded fingers. It was free of charge. Anoki let out one more disbelieving snort. Yeah, and I will have a tea party with the Raikage after this meeting is over. Naruto folded his arms across his chest, but his hand squeezed the fabric of his vest hidden behind his elbow to channel down some of his irritation as he answered. I will do it free of charge for any village if I could help save a life. That is very honorable, young shinobi, helping a fellow Jinchuriki. Naruto glanced over the Mizukage and his lips curved into a soft smile as he made a small thanking bow. Honorable but foolish. Handing a living weapon to an enemy is just foolish. The Tsuchikage muttered with irritation, but suddenly the room was filled with a thunderous bang as the Raikage slammed his fist onto the table, cracking the fine piece of furniture. Previously hidden weapons were unsheathed, muscles tensed until their breaking points within the lines of the guards. Only Naruto stood still behind his father, his arms still folded across his chest. The Raikage opened his mouth to bark out. You should know better than to call a Jinchuriki a living weapon, Anoki. The ratio of Jinchuriki is quite high in this room. The old man gave an uninterested shrug after he glanced over at the Mizukage and B, who observed him with narrowed eyes as he slowly backed away with a grimace on his face. And didn't know how right he was while another well-hidden blonde host restrained his snort with all of his willpower. Minato let out a weary sigh and shook his head in his displeasure. He traced his eyes over the village leaders once more before he finally slowly straightened himself on the chair. My fellow Kage, I would like to ask you to put aside your disagreements. The point of this meeting is to strengthen the village's bonds with each other, not to have petty arguments on trivial matters over and over again. I'm here to offer an alliance in the name of Konoha to all of you. Disbelieving snorts echoed inside the chamber from the Tsuchikage and the Raikage. Only the leader of Mist observed the young leader with calm and calculating eyes. So that is why you asked every village to participate today? To gather all Kage in one place and offer an alliance? Minato turned his head toward Yagura. No, it just came with the package. I would be foolish if I didn't utilize this opportunity. As if I will trust any of you. Anoki snarled and folded his arms across his small chest, eyeing every participant with narrowed eyes. The feeling is mutual, old geezer. The Raikage hissed through gritted teeth, mimicking the old leader's action as his eyes ran over each leader. The Mizukage however stayed in silence for a long minute. His gaze was locked on Minato, trying to figure out what was happening inside the Hokage's head. What will you offer in case of an alliance? This kicked out the two cantankerous leaders from their small worlds. What? You can't be serious. Calm and collected pink eyes moved toward the stunned Raikage. I am serious. An alliance between Mist and Leaf is unheard of. I'm interested in what Konoha can offer. Minato leaned back on his seat casually as he answered Yagura's question. A new trade route between our nations. Help from my shinobi if you need it, or my personal help if it is necessary, just like it happened with the Kazekage. Minato glanced toward the silent leader of the sand, waiting for validation, which came in the form of a small, agreeing nod. No way I'm going to agree to this. I'd rather die than to ally with you. Anoki muttered, making Naruto to frown and step ahead. Why? Why would you throw away an opportunity like this? You could help your people. All attention turned toward him almost instantly. The aging leader of stone narrowed his eyes as he observed the young boy. You're young, but you are old enough to live through the war between our nations. Would you just put aside every hatred and smiled into your enemy's face like nothing had happened before? Konoha slaughtered my shinobi. Your Hokage over there himself killed hundreds of my people with his own hands. So did almost every participant in this room. How couldn't we feel hatred toward the other? You can't change everything like that. Naruto hardened his face, sheer determination appeared in the cerulean eyes, almost burning through the black orbs of Anoki. Forgiving someone is the first step toward a new world which is free of the circle of hatred. A new world which is free from murder, from vengeance, from the hatred you are currently feeling. You are a fool if you think that this is just so simple. Did you even hear what you were saying? Naruto turned his head toward the Raikage, who observed him with irritated eyes. But the blonde's determination only hardened rather than falter by the piercing gaze he received. He already knew what to count on from the Raikage. A speech about power and that a shinobi should never bow to another that easily. Kumo will never bow to any of the other countries. The only thing a shinobi should respect is power. If we let this alliance be forged, we will become weak. And the weak will be crushed. I won't let Cloud fall that far. Naruto forced his face to stay stoic, and restrained the enormous urge to roll his eyes at his accurate predilection. You think allying with Konoha or any of the other nations here makes you weaker? Then the fool isn't me. It's rather you. Killing intent filled the council chamber as soon as the words left Naruto's lips. The Hokage slowly raised from his seat with dangerously narrowed eyes. The guards tensed again, and this time Minato also prepared to appear behind his brother and get him out of the furious Kage's way if necessary. But Naruto didn't seem to be concerned about the raised tension between him and the leader. He just continued. The best example of alliance is a genin team. You will first maybe fight against each other, annoy each other, even hate each other. But soon, you will realize that you can do nothing alone. Some things can only be done if you've got friends and allies to stand beside you. You can find friends and allies in the most unthinkable places. In a rival. In an enemy. All of you are here because someone was helping you. Someone was pushing you over your limits to become Kage. The history of Shinobi is about power. About wars. The winner will be the most powerful nation. And that's it. There shouldn't be compromise between ninja. It's just a weakness. Hissed the leader of Cloud through gritted teeth, his eyes narrowed into slits by the growing irritation. Then what? Naruto snapped. You will start another war? Just to show you are more powerful than Konoha? Then Iwa or Kiri or Suna? Maybe you are strong, Raikage-sama, but there are a lot of strong people out there, even in this room, who can kick your butt easily if they work together. The Hokage narrowed his eyes even more, if it's even possible, observing the young boy in front of him, while the village leaders settled down to watch their encounter. Even Minato's until now tense and also worried features mirrored a great amount of curiosity, eagerly waiting to find out what his relative will make out of the mess he'd just created. You are talking nonsense. Who are you anyway? Namikaze Toraku, Chunin of Konohagakure no Sato. It was Minato who answered the question with a calm tone, gesturing toward Naruto, after he shot a calming glance to his relative. A Namikaze. My guess was right then. The Hokage muttered and folded his arms, his previous irritation slowly disappearing. Namikaze or not, you are just a lowly Chunin who knows nothing about power. You will have the right to speak if you reach a certain level of power. You are babbling the same nonsense as Jiraiya of the Sannin a long time ago. That the shinobi will understand each other. That one day, there will be someone who will bring peace to the world. Made a quick, almost invisible glance toward Minato, then snorted. Who would believe in such nonsense? Only a moron like him. You would be surprised, Hokage, how strong this lowly Chunin is. Minato stated once more with a calm tone, making the named muscular man to snort again in his disbelief. But Naruto just let go of the subject about him being weak as anger rose inside his chest, hearing the insults toward the Sannin he held so close to his heart during all these years. Then I am a moron. And I'm proud of it. Because I believe in what he believes. I believe that one day every shinobi will understand each other. Kumo and Iwa and Konoha, Suna and Kiri. Even Jinchuriki and the Bijou. And when that day comes, then real peace will fall upon the shinobi world, like Jiraiya said. You just have to take the first step toward it. But it can only be reached together and not alone. Torakuken is right. All eyes snapped toward the brawny form of Katsuchi, who until now stood silently in the background as he was supposed to be, making Anoki to narrow his eyes when he glanced over his shoulder to send a questioning glare toward the fighter. The Iwa commander's piercing gaze traveled toward the two blondes, before he fixed it on the floor. I believe in him. I had tried to kill him, to get vengeance on the Hokage. But, it's over. We should seek peace and stop fighting over the past. During my stay here, my team became good friends with some from Konoha. With Torakuken. Even with Hokage-sama. And I realized that this is what I want. This peace is what I really want deep inside my heart, not vengeance. I myself stopped fighting over the past. I forgive. I forgive you, Minato-sama. Dark eyes glanced up finally from the room, to meet with cerulean pools of the stunned village leader. Slowly, the surprise was over and Minato stood up to give a deep, respectful bow toward the foreign shinobi, making almost everyone in the room to suck in a surprised breath. Thank you, Kitsuke-san. I feel myself honored. Somehow, not even the Raikage interrupted the meeting after this. There were no loud arguments, no more bickering as every village leader somehow settled into another state of mind, all of them watching the blonde teen behind the Hokage with a calculating eye. Naruto glanced toward Shiko, who was currently eyeing Killer Bee as he stoically slurped his ramen at the other side of the counter at Ichiraku. The three shinobi, each from another nation, sat side by side peacefully, and Naruto couldn't shake off the urge to grin like an idiot at the out-of-the-way scene. Iwa, Kyumo and Konoha. The shinobi from those three nations held the greatest grudge against each other, and still. Here they are, eating and casually chatting like nothing had happened in the past between the three nations. The meeting went surprisingly well after his interference, however Kurama never stopped his almost continuous displeased grumble about him stepping in. Even if it hadn't ended with an instant real alliance like back then, at least none of the Kage jumped at each other's throats. They listened to each other, they spoke with each other. Even Anoki and A weren't continuously bickering. Well, at least not all of the time. Finally, Naruto's cerulean pools settled on the younger form of his former teacher, comrade and friend, and the blonde host glued his eyes on Killer Bee. The rapper, after the meeting was over, had sneaked away from the observing eyes of his brother, leaving behind one of his ink clones to guard his relative, who actually thought that he guarded the loud-mouthed soldier more than vice versa. The Kyumo nin wandered around Konoha alone, however every twitch of his fingers was followed by a whole ANBU squad silently in the shadows. That was when he bumped into Naruto and Shiko. Okay. It wasn't actually a real accident, more likely the result of well-composed timing from the blonde. A sudden familiar presence appeared behind Naruto's back, kicking him out from his musing, but also making B tense when Minato casually sat down next to the only empty seat between the name Jinchuriki and the Chunin wannabe, making the scene even more dreamlike. You should go back, B-san. The Raikage will soon realize that you've snuck out. The tension slowly disappeared from the name Jinchuriki as he casually shrugged off the advice. If it's about him, he would just lock me up in a safe house. That Bakayaro. B muttered into his bowl. Feeling wary in an alien village is normal. Minato answered in the same casual way, setting his triangle hat onto the counter, then stretching his arms behind his back with a satisfied moan. Then he felt a small tug on his long white coat. Minato-sama. The named Hokage blinked and glanced down to Shiko with a questioning expression on his face, waiting for the boy to continue. When will I finally get the spar you promised me? Everybody went silent for a second, the chopsticks frozen in midair in the hand of Kyumo's Jinchuriki. The soft chuckle of Minato finally kicked him out from his surprise, slowly lowering his hands to shoot a disbelieving glance toward the boy. The Hokage of Konoha promised you a spar? You of all people? A genin of Iwa? Shiko grimaced and folded his arms across his chest in a sulking way, before he retorted. Yeah, why is that so hard to believe for everyone I tell? B let out a snort which in the end transformed into a loud laugh. Maybe because it is really hard to believe? The Kyumo fighter shook his head and shot another glance toward the softly smiling Naruto. But, I shouldn't be surprised. Weird things are happening between Konoha and the other nations. Suna suddenly supporting the leaf, the second head of Iwa's forces bowed to the Hokage. His eyes settled again on the now widely grinning blonde Chunin, with a wondering expression on his face. And somehow I also can't fight off the urge to meet again with you. Even, my companion told me to do so. He thinks you are an interesting one. Naruto raised a curious eyebrow, but his grin never faltered. Gyuki was always disturbingly observant. See what you've done? Now even Kumo is way too interested in you than I would be pleased with in this timeline. Kurama grumbled in his mindscape, his tails were continuously swaying behind his back in a restless manner. The time traveler restrained a wince, when one tail hit the soddy ground of his consciousness in an attempt to channel down the fox's frustration. You can speak with it? Minato glanced to the side with a curious expression on his fine features. Him. Be corrected. What? Minato quirked a confused eyebrow. It's him. The Hachibi is a male. And to answer your question, Hokage-sama, yes. I can speak with him. And he has quite an opinion about you too. It was now Naruto's time to snort, but it soon morphed into a soft chuckle. I would be interested in Gyuki's opinion about Minato. Gyuki? B tilted his head to the side in a questioning manner, now all of his attention was focused on the blonde Chunin. You said that you are in talking manner and you never asked his name until now? Naruto chuckled once again, not really concerned by the raised eyebrow of his father, nor his observant gaze. We aren't in that kind of good relationship. B muttered and shrugged before he continued. Even if it's better nowadays, he still keeps calling me bastard, idiot or something like that. Another snort bubbled out from the blonde Jinchuriki, which soon morphed into a fit of laughter, closing him into his own small world, not aware of the increased eyes on him. This was the point where Shiko lost his patience and interrupted the two men by a loud snort. What are you talking about? Hey, Shikoken. Don't you think you should be heading to the stadium? Naruto said, diverting the conversation after he glanced up to the sky, noting the sun's position. The Chunin wannabe also glanced up but shrugged casually. Yeah, I do. But you are also still here. Why should I worry if the Hokage is also here? They won't start the exam without him or you. A cheeky smile spread across Minato's face. Shikoken. You are forgetting something. The named genin raised a doubtful eyebrow. I can be there in a blink with Toraku. But I can't say the same about you. You wouldn't do it. The genin stated in a casual way, but seeing the widening grin on Minato's face, threatening to simply split it in two, his confidence faltered. The small stand was filled with the tinkle of coins as the blonde Chunin dropped them on the counter, with his father's hands on his shoulder and an equally wide and cheeky sneer on his face. Try us. In the next blink both Minato and Naruto were gone, with the flash of their golden locks, leaving behind a stunned Jinchuriki and a shocked genin with opened mouth. It took several seconds before the Chunin candidate hurled down from his seat to start dashing through half of the village. B was left there alone, staring at the entrance of the ramen stand for several long minutes, before he shook his head slowly. So, Gyuki right? The blonde, tan-skinned Kumo Nin suddenly winced to something only he heard, shaking his head once again. Definitely Gyuki. B muttered to himself before he also headed toward the arena to join the already gathering crowd. Naruto glanced around himself again, noting the immense amount of shinobi and future customers all around the viewing area. Lords, wealthy business people, and nobody could know what kind of place the others held all around them. Based on the fancy clothes, even a daimyo could be one of them. The arena was so crowded that not even the child version of Gamakichi could sneak through the people easily. Even as he stood in the background of the wide balcony, which was occupied with the strongest people of the nations, he could feel some glares he received from the crowd on his side. Shiko had burst through the crowd 10 minutes ago, dumping a long chain of profanities on him. But now, he was panting at the upper part where the Chunin candidates were preparing for their match and nothing distracted his thoughts anymore. The blonde time traveler was nervous beyond words, despite his composed outlook. He had already gotten into an argument with Kurama 2 times in the last 10 minutes because of his anxiety. He couldn't restrain the sudden flinch when Minato reassuringly tapped his back, before stepping next to him to run his eyes along the crowd. "Are you alright?" Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but when no words came out from his sour and dry throat he instead nodded. An understanding smile appeared on Minato's face. "It's time to make the announcement and also open the exam." Naruto nodded once again instead of opening his mouth to answer. The young village leader made one last glance over his shoulder where the other 4 Kage sat on the wide balcony. Minato cleared his throat and stepped to the edge of the parapet, making the until now loudly clattering crowd to slowly become silent. The yellow flash of Konoha waited for a long silent minute, waiting to gather every single person's attention, before he talked. His voice echoed, filling the whole stadium in an instant. "People of Konoha and all other nations. Thank you for coming to watch the Chunin selection exam. Candidates arrived from all across the Shinobi land to display their skills and suitability. But before we start the main tournament matches, an important occurrence has to be announced." Minato let the words sink in as murmurs spread across the crowd, letting them die down before he continued. "Orochimaru of the Sanin's is dead." The people around them suddenly exploded as one man, forcing an annoyed and irritated expression on the leader's face as he had to stop before he could really start his speech. Even the 4 Kage couldn't suppress the urge to start talking with their companion. Minato waited for a long minute, but when the disbelieving and angry shouting, murmuring and whispering didn't decrease, killer intent started to leak from his body, filling the whole stadium in a blink of an eye, making every attendant to shut his mouth. "As I said, Orochimaru of the Sanin's is dead. However, I hereby preclude Orochimaru from ever being called a citizen or shinobi of Konoha, and I declare him a missing nin." The last remains of murmurs instantly died. "We have discovered that he has done many terrible things. Things that should never have happened. Orochimaru had been performing unlawful and immoral experimentation on innocent men, women and children. He killed hundreds. His sins will never be forgiven. His remains will be destroyed and placed onto an unmarked grave." Minato's voice filled the silent stadium once more. "He was killed and punished in a unknown battle with my brother, Namake's Toraku." Minato gestured toward Naruto, and waved a hand for him to come closer. The blonde Chunin gulped and hesitantly obeyed, slowly stepping next to his father. His short advance was followed by thousands of eyes, stabbing into his guts, but the piercing gaze of the 4 Kage was the most intense on his back, making the 4 or 5 steps last almost an eternity. "We were damn lucky back then. So damn lucky." Kitsuchi muttered with wide eyes, more to himself than to his leader next to him. His eyes were glued on the Chunin's tense back. "I hereby give the rank of Jounin to Namake's Toraku." Unnatural silence filled the stadium in the next moment, not even nature dared to make any noise around them, as the information sunk in. Then a loud shout filled the whole stadium in the next moment, echoing back and forth in the silence. "I told you that you are all wrong. See? He is a damn hero. I told you that there must be something in the background." Iruka yelled with the full force of his lungs, forcing a small smile on Naruto's face. As soon as the echo of his future teacher died down, the crowd exploded again, and this time the murmurs, conversations and excited yelps didn't falter for long minutes, to Minato's annoyance. When they finally did, the Hokage cleared his throat again. "The main tournament matches shall now begin." Naruto didn't move, he just stood there with a wide grin frozen on his face, listening to the new murmur spreading across the people all around him. Only when Minato poked him hard in his ribs did the grin falter from his face, giving space to an embarrassed smile. "Don't let the glory foggy your mind." Naruto shot back an annoyed gaze, before he gracefully landed on the shore of the arena, to face with the 8 stunned Chunin candidates. Shiko gazed at him with open mouth, while the rest of the genin in front of him also observed him somewhat disbelievingly, somehow suspiciously. Only one pair of eyes ate him with hate, then it morphed into disbelief and denial, but in the next blink all emotion was gone from Enko's pupilless light brown eyes as the small girl composed herself in seconds, pushing aside her troubled thoughts. Shiko, finally shaking off his surprise, glanced around nervously. His brown eyes flickered from the small colorful Jinchuriki from waterfall toward the emotionless eyes of Enko. Then he glanced around, noting the other participants next to him. One from Cloud, one more young boy from Konoha, looking quite sick with those dark rings under his eyes, he noted to himself. His silent teammate on his other side, the reserved and stoic one from Sand, and the girl from Mist, who silently stood a little away from everybody else, her eyes cautiously observing every single twitch of the others. 8 participants stood there, waiting for the newest jounin of Konoha, to finally call for the first 2 names. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face, threatening to split it in 2 as he ran his azure eyes along the line of the excited children. With one last encouraging smile he called for the first 2 participants, naming Shiko's teammate and Enko. Before the others left the arena to prepare for their own fight, Naruto crouched down next to Enko, who carefully avoided looking up from the ground, even as Naruto eyed her from only centimeters. "Enka-kan." Naruto called softly, making the girl glance up, expression as emotionless as ever. But her eyes still looked betrayed beyond words. No words were exchanged between them, only their eyes spoke to each other until Enko finally opened her lips. "I'm all right, Torakusan. I can handle it." Naruto made one last glance toward the emotionless face of the girl and nodded. "I believe in you." Suddenly Enko's dead eyes shined with a surprised flame, before it was gone again after a small nod. Only when all the participants left the arena did Naruto step in front of the 2 candidates. "All right. I want a clear fight. No killing is allowed." A minute later both genin burrowed themselves in an intense taijutsu match. Minato watched as his relative silently stood on the edge of the wide balcony, his eyes and all of his attention was glued on the battle at his feet, muscles tensed, hands on the last sign of a seal so he could instantly step in before something went wrong. Meanwhile the IWA genin shot another series of shuriken toward Enko as a distraction, making the Tsuchikage let out a pleased snort when Konoha's Chunin contender barely saw through the distraction. A lowly Chunin of Konoha managed to kill Orochimaru of the Sannin. The Raikage muttered, gaze also glued on the battle at their feet, but he still shot a quick glance at the back of the blonde jounin. "It seems you were hiding a great weapon during the war, Hokage. Why?" Minato stayed in silence for a long minute, watching as earth spikes rushed toward Enko before he answered. "Because Toraku wasn't part of the village during the war." The Tsuchikage let out a disbelieving snort. "Yeah, he just fall from the sky, didn't he? You were training him in the shadows, weren't you? Let's play with open cards. Why did you hide him during the war?" "We found him in autumn of last year. He appeared from nowhere, bloody, wounded, without memories." Minato stated calmly, eyes still fixed on the battle. "And you just let a Kage-level shinobi, who appeared out of nowhere, join your village?" The Mizukage asked curiously, pink eyes glued on Minato instead of the fight, noting the small smile on the Hokage's face. Minato finally averted his gaze from the 2 genin to glance up to the other Kage with an emotionless face. "Well, he was either a gift from Kami or one of you had sent him here to infiltrate the village and assassinate me." The blonde leader scanned the other 4 Kage with a stoic expression, looking for any hint. But none of them showed what he was looking for with his remark. All of the others did the same, looking askance at each other, searching for the one who had ordered the assumed assassination. Minato's formerly expressionless face moved into a pleased smile. "At least I thought so in the beginning. Nowadays, I stick with the Kami's gift version." The crowd around them suddenly became silent, the air heavy and suspenseful, then in the next moment the people exploded with amusement and burst into applause. The 5 Kage blinked down, noting the unconscious figure laying flat in the middle of the battle arena. Anoki let out a sigh and slowly shook his head, watching the medics as they transported his blacked-out Chunin candidate away. Naruto slowly shook his head in displeasure. Shiko's teammate pulled out an impressive move, however he was foolish and got caught inside his own attack instead of Anko, knocking himself unconscious. The newest Jounin of Konoha reappeared in the middle of the field, to call for the next 2 participants. An hour later, 4 figures stood silently in the middle of the battlefield. Shiko, Anko, Waterfall's Jinchuriki, Fu, and the silent genin from Mist with long straight black hair. What was her name? Megumi. Yeah, definitely Megumi. Naruto mused silently. The blonde time traveler glanced up to the balcony, waiting for his father to call up the second round. Dear attendees, the second round of the Chunin selection exam shall begin. However, this time we made some changes. Instead of unknown fights, the next round will be a team match. The crowd exploded once again, so did the other Kage behind Minato. A what? Team match? You heard me well, Mizuka-jessima. The Hokage responded softly, without looking back. Mitarashi Anko from Konoha and Megumi from Kiri. Step forward. A small smile spread across Minato's face when the 2 girls did so. From now on, you are a team. Your opponents will be Shiko from Iwa and Fu from Takigakure. If someone is knocked out, the other team will be victorious. You have got 10 minutes to discuss your tactics, before the fight begins. Minato didn't wait for the stunned genin to gather themselves, he just casually walked back to his seat. His movement was followed by the equally stunned village leaders. We haven't received a word regarding this twist. It's unheard of. Anoki stated with obvious annoyance in his voice. It was Toriku's idea. A good shinobi never leaves a comrade behind. The purpose of this exam is to reduce the distance between the nations. And this is the best way to do so. The yellow flash answered casually, with a wide, cheeky smile on his face. He watched as the 4 candidates finally shook off their surprise, but their eyes were still scanning their new teammate suspiciously. There are too many surprises during this Chunin exam for my liking. The Raikage muttered, his chin was resting in his palms as he also observed the 2 temporary teams at his feet. None of the other Kage stated that they actually very much agreed with the leader of Cloud. At least for once. When the 10 minutes was gone, the participants lined up in front of each other to begin the last match. Muscles and nerves tensed until the breaking point, waiting for one last sign from Naruto to finally begin. And when it came with one loud yell, the outline of the stadium and onlookers within blurred for them as they dashed toward each other. With one swift movement of his arms, Shiko shot a set of razor-sharp kunai toward Anko, who easily dodged the rain of weapons. However, only her temporary teammates' sharp eyes saved her from a sneak attack. Razor-sharp wind chakra shaved the place smooth where a second ago Anko's opponent stood, making the Chunin contestant swallow down her previous cockiness. Without the silent, black-haired girl's help, she would be knocked out. With one thankful nod toward the Mist genin they flung into action again, but this time together. Shiko hissed a curse. Through his teeth, while dodging a side kick from Megumi, but from the corner of his eyes, he could still see as the small mint green-haired girl from Waterfall struggled under the punches her opponent gave her. Without a second of consideration he jumped to give a helping hand to his teammate. He landed just in time to deflect an attack from Anko. They suddenly found themselves back to back. A wave of summoned snakes rushed toward them suddenly, their arms clung together to fluidly dance out from the attack's way with each other's help like a seasoned team would do. A small smile forced its way onto Naruto's until now concentrating face, seeing the sudden cooperation between the genin. He could feel the annoyance behind him from the 4 Kage, but also the curiosity leaking behind it, directed both toward him and the battle at their feet. Fists met with fists, kunai and shuriken met, filling the arena with sharp clinks as metal met metal, the music of a shinobi fight with its sometimes unpredictable, sometimes mystical, and sometimes rhythmic beat. Jutsu struck against each other, sending dust and debris all over the battlefield. Naruto suddenly narrowed his eyes when Enko's pleased snort echoed all over the walls, as Fu's small body started to slowly tremble, then sway like she was slowly losing consciousness. A small snake snuck out from under her clothes before the small Jinchuriki dropped to the ground. Shiko was fast enough to catch her body, before her head could meet with the hard ground, his chocolate-brown eyes suddenly filled with concern. Naruto let out a sigh and slowly shook his head. They had been applying such good teamwork. But Enko was indeed as sneaky as her late teacher. The blonde let his hand finally release the technique which had been ready to be triggered, letting his hands fall at his sides to get some rest. But they couldn't get it. Malicious intent rushed over them in the next second, tension raising high, people desperately looking for the source of their sudden uneasiness. Only Naruto's eyes were wide and locked on the small unconscious mint-head girl. Before anyone could move, vicious yellow chakra surged out from the small girl's laying form. Freely flowing, hovering, twisting and writhing in the air like it was a living thing. Naruto didn't think when another surge of power rushed out from the small girl, sending the Chunin wannabes flying to three corners of the compass rose. A clone popped into existence, rushing toward Enko, while the real Naruto grabbed the small girl from mist. Naruto looked to the side where his father had caught Shiko, sharing a quick glance. Fu. Don't give up. Fight. Naruto desperately tried to channel his thoughts toward the small girl inside the vicious chakra storm. Suddenly the crowd exploded into screams as they shook off their temporary stasis, civilians surged out from every entrance of the arena, but their place was taken by countless shinobi. An ANBU appeared next. To Minato waiting for their leader to give his order. Get the civilians out of here. We will take care of it. The masked man hesitantly took a step toward his leader and opened his mouth to argue, but another vicious chakra spike made him forget his intentions and instead he disappeared to finally obey. The Kazekage straightened from his seat, his movement was followed by 7 pairs of eyes. Where are you going? The real show is just starting. Grunted the Raikage. Gaara's father shot a glare behind his shoulder and jumped up to the edge of the balcony. I'm repaying my debt. Before the Kazekage could say anything else, Kitsuchi stepped next to him, to observe as the two blondes were shouting to each other trying to bring about a plan and to get closer to the source of the malicious energy which was blocking their sight of the small child. What the hell are you doing, Kitsuchi? You are here to watch my back. The burly shinobi let out a sigh. You are more than capable of taking care of yourself for 5 minutes. But they need help. And I'm going to help them. What's wrong with everyone here? The leader of Kyumo snorted and fidgeted in his seat to get a more comfortable position to enjoy the upcoming show. But to his great surprise, Mist's leader also raised from his seat and casually walked up next to the Kazekage. What are we waiting for? One of my genin is down there. The Kazekage eyed him for a short second then nodded and jumped down, strictly followed by the other two and landed gracefully between the two blondes. So what's the plan? Yagura turned to Minato with a questioning look on his face, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. It seems that Enko's summons poison is affecting the seal. The poison seems to confuse chakra diffusion, and it would also appear that the seal is breaking due to the lack of chakra circulating in it. If I can get close enough, I can use one of my seals to straighten it. My gold dust can restrain Shikaku's power, should at least be able to slow down the 7-tailed beast. My coral palm technique could also help you in that. If anything goes wrong I can still use the Bijuu's power. Hey, this seems like a good party to me. Can I join? Someone interrupted them from the background and Naruto couldn't help but smile as B stepped next to him. 5 Kage-level shinobi, and not to mention 3 of them were Jinchuriki with control. It was more than enough to lull the seven-tailed beast back to his slumber. Naruto glanced up to the balcony where the Raikage and the Tsuchikage still occupied their seats with an irritated expression on their faces. Naruto gestured with his head in an inviting manner, but all he received from the other 2 leaders was a snort and slightly turned heads with noses scrunched in a sulking manner. But instead of being disappointed, he just laughed. He glanced to the other 5 shinobi. One from each of the big nations, discussing their tactics like a real team. It was already much more than he imagined. A roar interrupted his musing as with one last chakra spike an otherworldly creature appeared in the middle of the arena. Its form was stuck between a human and a giant beetle, 3 tails flung freely behind its back. But thankfully it was unmoving. A scroll appeared from Naruto's pocket instantly, and not a second later a purple barrier appeared around the whole arena, locking away the bijou. So gentlemen? What are we waiting for? No one said anything, he only received some annoyed glares. But in the next second, their forms blurred out from existence. 5 people reappeared around the awakening bijou, each of them already ready to attack or deflect. Gold dust spread across the battlefield as soon as Yagura's palm connected with the bijou's bare back. Faint pink coral started to groan while hard ground mixed with gold dust whirling around the beast, grabbing all 6 of its feet to steady it in place. A tentacle shot forward in the same moment, squeezing the bijou harder to stay in place. Minato reappeared on the tentacle and raised his hands to slam it and place his seal, but before it could happen, another wave of vicious energy dismissed the restraints in the next instant. Yagura jumped backward and raised a curious eyebrow. It's stronger than I thought. It must be quite pissed off. Naruto nodded in agreement and jumped next to his father. But before any of them could say a word, the bijou let out a loud roar and soon another tail came into existence, but the creature was thankfully still standing still, like it was waiting for something to happen. Minato frowned. Why isn't it attacking? It's Fu. She is still trying to restrain the bijou. Naruto noted. Or much more guessed. But based on Kurama's agreeing nod, he was actually right. It doesn't matter. Let's get this over with. The Kazekage stated, a black ring appearing around his eyes, while his hands were blurred as he made the hand signs with insane speed. But before he could finish it, strong hands stopped his movement as soon Naruto realized what the Kage was about to do. You can't kill the host. Fu is still there, fighting for control. The Kazekage narrowed his eyes, observing the teen, but in the end, to everybody's surprise, he nodded and took a step backward. Suddenly another roar echoed inside the high walls. Vicious intent flowing over the place once again. Naruto swung his head toward the bijou, grabbing the 2 nearest persons instantly, and only his speed saved them as a razor-sharp stinger rushed toward where they stood a second ago. Debris and dust flew across the landscape, shrouding their vision. With one swift movement of Naruto's wrist, wind chakra surged from his palm, clearing their line of sight instantly. And what he found behind the dust made him freeze in place. A thick ice wall was shrouding his vision with an enormous tree chunk sticking out from the middle of it, where he knew the Mizukage had jumped. The named leader was just standing there, his eyes wide, surprise written all over his face. Naruto glanced to the side, looking for the Hayatan user. The small black-haired Chunin candidate from Kiri stood firm on the ground, her heavy breathing echoed all around them, small hands still clutching the last hand sign of her jutsu. Yagura finally also spotted the black-haired girl, their eyes met for a moment and the girl froze, her eyes widened by pure terror and fear. The mist leader held the eye connection only a second more, then smiled at the girl and sent a thankful nod. Naruto glanced toward the frozen Shiko and barked out in a commanding tone, holding out a small paper tag toward him. Shiko. Get Anko and Megumi and retreat. Your job is over. Channel some chakra into the tag and stay out of the way. The Chunin candidate shook off his terror and slowly nodded. In the next second, he grabbed the two girls and rushed toward the back of the stadium with the paper tag in his hands. Another purple barrier came into existence in the next second around the three genin. There was no time for more words. Another tail threateningly started to grow on the biju's back. Yagura jumped into action together with the others. Gold mixed with soil again, hardening it this time like diamond around the 6 legs. More tentacles shot forward to wrap around the biju's form again. And this time, lightning surged forward with insane speed from a giant electric dragon as the Raikage jumped next to Naruto. It was a pain to watch how you were struggling. The blonde time traveler sent a wide grin in response, watching as his father reappeared again above the biju, slamming his palm onto its back. An ink-black pattern spread across the scarred ground. The tension slowly started to disappear. Naruto watched as the vicious chakra slowly started to fade away, until the small burned body of Fu became visible. Naruto immediately jumped toward the girl, before she could hit the ground. He gently placed her down, foggy orange eyes looking up to him. "Hey. It's all right now." A small smile appeared on the girl's weary face. "I heard you. I heard you all the time shouting at me to not give up. To fight," she whispered. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face. He took a step back as soon as the first medic arrived, but the soft smile never left his face. But his peace was interrupted when a body slammed into his own, almost making him tumble to the ground. Naruto glanced down to find the trembling Shiko, tightly clutching his waist in an attempt to calm some of his fear. Naruto didn't say a word, only patted his brown crown in a soothing way. "You did well, Shiko," Naruto murmured. However, the genin didn't respond by words. Shiko sniffed and nodded, his face still carefully shrouded by the blonde's waist. They stayed like that for long minutes until the child gathered himself. "I thought I was going to die. You too. And Kitsuchiji. And Minato-san. And everybody." Shiko finally murmured through the fabric of Naruto's vest, making Naruto's smile even softer. "We aren't as soft as you think, you know." The genin finally released him and sent an annoyed glare through his watery eyes, breaking all of his previous tension into tiny shreds. Shiko narrowed his eyes when Naruto started to snicker, and he gathered a lungful of air to hail a long round of swearing toward the blonde time traveler. Kitsuchi stepped next to his leader at the balcony, who was currently watching the scene with an unreadable expression on his face. Anoki didn't know what to think anymore, or what to feel. So he decided to ignore his thoughts and emotions until he finally figured out what to think about today's happenings. His eyes trailed toward the Raikage, who was currently obviously scolding his brother for interrupting. Then his pools moved toward his genin, desperately hugging the young Namikaze, while Minato watched the scene with a soft smile on his face from the corner of his eyes, as he was currently in a conversation with the Kazekage and the Mizukage. The wrinkles around his mouth twitched as the smallest smile started to tug his lips upward. Anoki let out a sigh and shook his head, forgetting about his commander next to him. But when Kitsuchi's baritone cut into the air, he immediately regretted his slip. "It's a nice view, isn't it?" The old leader stayed in silence for long, long minutes, the innocent question left almost forgotten in the air, until the Kage finally answered by a soft whisper. Maybe more to himself than to his commander. "Yes. It is." For genin stood straight in front of the strongest people of the elemental countries, filling the council chamber once again. Observant eyes were glued on their nervous forms. Finally Minato decided that the tension had risen high enough, so he straightened from his seat and a proud smile appeared on his face almost instantly as he ran his sight on the tense genin one last time before he opened his mouth and his confident voice filled the until now silent room. "Shiko from Iwagakure no Sato. Please step forward." The Chunin hopeful did so after a gulp. "Fighting against hatred is the hardest, but you managed to do so. I hereby give you the rank of Chunin because you had shown flawless teamwork and the instinct to protect your team during the fight. Minato sent a warm smile, holding out a small scroll for the IWA soldier. Shiko let out revealed sigh. He fought down the trembling of his legs and slowly walked to get the scroll with a wide grin on his face, which stayed on place even when he moved back to the line. The old Anoki couldn't fight the urge, his lips also curved up into an almost invisible smile. Mitarashi Anko from Konohagakure no Sato. Anko straightened in an instant. I hereby declare you as a Chunin. Staying calm and collected in even the hardest of situations is essential during a fight. You've earned my respect for that. Minato's smile widened as he handed over the scroll to the purple-haired small girl. He turned his head toward the silent girl from Mist. Yuki Megumi. I hereby declare you as the newest Chunin of Mist. Keeping an eye on your surroundings and protecting your leader while facing an opponent far stronger than you is something which has to be acknowledged. The dark-haired girl twitched and after a thankful bow, she went back to her place with graceful steps. However, her eyes drifted toward Yagura uncertainly from time to time. Minato stood in silence for a long tense minute, eyeing to only remaining genin. The mint-head girl fixed her eyes on the floor with carefully restrained emotions. Fighting against a bijou is hard even for a Kage. The mint-head genin twitched, eyes still carefully averted. If a genin is doing the same, it is honorable. Minato's smile softened. Fu from Takigakure. The name Jinchuriki finally painfully slowly raised her head to meet with a pair of azure pools. As I said, fighting against a tailed beast is an honorable feat, so I will honor you with the rank of Chunin. The mint-head girl opened her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. She gaped for a long minute, unable to squeeze any sound or air from her stressed lungs until she finally found her lost voice. But two didn't fight. It was my fault and you didn't fight with jutsu. You fought with willpower. Minato interrupted. You have to have a strong will to resist the taunting of the power of a bijou, against the hatred they are feeling against humanity. The small mint-head girl shook her crown, her green locks following the movement, gracefully swinging together with her head in the motion. It just wanted to fly freely, high up to the sky until it could touch the clouds. It didn't want to hurt anyone. It just wanted freedom. But I was too afraid to let it go and... A blonde eyebrow raised curiously until it reached Minato's forehead protector. He glanced toward his brother, who until now silently stood at the back of the room, his eyes closed and only a small smile on his face indicated that he was indeed listening the whole time. The leader mimicked the warm expression as he turned back to the newest Chunin of Waterfall. Then maybe you should speak with it. Fu snapped up her head, eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. The yellow flash of Konoha made a side glance once more at his relative before he continued. A young man once said that the time will come when every shinobi will understand each other. Even the bijou and its Jinchuriki. First we have to know more about them to understand them. Naruto's eyes flung open, azure pools were fixed on his father's back. Then his expression relaxed into a soft smile. Fu eyed the leader for a moment then blinked away her confusion. In the end, she hesitantly nodded and made a deep bow. I will, Hokage-sama. Silence fell over the council chamber, each leader observing their Chunin with a proud expression. Then they slowly started to move and leave the room until only Yagura and Megumi were left behind, together with some lurking ANBU hidden deep inside the shadows. The mist leader eyed the girl for long minutes, who didn't dare to move or look up to her leader. The young Kage finally let out a long sigh and stepped in front of his newest Chunin. I still don't know if you are brave or just simply a suicidal fool. Revealing your bloodline limit while the citizens of your home are persecuting your name. Yagura shook his head disapprovingly, then his features moved into a thoughtful expression, his eyes fixed on the dome above their heads for a long time until he finally blinked and turned his attention back. But perhaps we could also use this to our advantage, to finally stop this madness. Megumi forced down her fear and finally glanced up to her leader with a confused expression on her fine features. However, the Mizukage didn't bother to clear her confusion. He just continued his musing. I was finally able to dismiss the graduation exam thanks to Momochi Zabuza. It came with great cost, but hundreds of children will be able to live in the future thanks to his act. If I play the cards right, maybe the people of Mist will also look differently at those who held a bloodline limit. But I will need your help, Yuki Megumi. You have to follow my orders. Yagura finally looked at his young soldier with a questioning expression, waiting for the small girl to answer. The Chunin chewed on her lower lip, but in the end nodded. Perfect. I will put you into Zabuza's care from now on. You have to become strong, and quickly. You have to know every aspect of your bloodline as soon as possible. But my family will be under my personal protection. No one will dare to lay even a finger on them. Yagura interrupted. The girl eyed the leader for a long silent minute until she made a low bow. Thank you, Mizukage-sama. Naruto silently watched the silhouettes of the delegations together with his father in the shadows of the giant gate, until their forms disappeared in the distance. The blonde time traveler let out a relieved sigh and a satisfied smile spread across his face in the next moment. A warm breeze ruffled his golden locks in a playful manner, tugging but also stroking his crown. A moan kicked him out from his small world. He glanced towards his stretching leader and his smile widened. It went better than any of us would have thought. Minato stated, waiting for his shoulder to pop back into its place. When it did so, another satisfied moan rushed out from his soft lips. The young leader rolled his head once more before he turned toward his grinning relative. Yagura is really interested in the alliance. Anoki stopped sulking and accepted the new trading route, and even the Raikage didn't close up against it. Minato made a wandering face. Well, at least I hope, based on his "I'll think about it" statement. I guess it is a good start. Naruto nodded in agreement and turned around to head inside the heart of the city. His slow steps were shadowed by his father. A crowd started to gather on the streets of Konoha for the upcoming festival. The last rays of the burning sun painted long shadows along their path. Lampions lit up all over the streets, painting everything with their soft yellowish light, replacing the slowly disappearing sunlight. A group of children passed them, playing tag, and avoided knocking their respected leader to the ground only by mere centimeters. They casually strolled in the crowd, neither of them speaking a word. Naruto watched the people of his beloved village as they were enjoying the festival. Children tugging their parents' clothes for some sweets, or playing games for silly and useless prizes under the proud eyes of their parents and friends. His lips almost instantly turned up in a small smile, but only for a second, before it was gone as he spotted something from the edge of his vision. Something familiar. Something which sent a shiver down his spine, and the feeling was soon followed by a droplet of cold sweat. Minato walked with his hands held behind his back, the same soft smile fixed on his lips. The leader suddenly blinked and the warm feeling disappeared from his side, and he realized that he had lost his brother. The Hokage blinked once more and turned around only to realize that his brother had fallen behind a few steps, his azure pools fixed on something in a shop stand unblinking. A frown crawled up on Minato's face when he stepped next to his frozen relative and traced back his sight to see an orange mask plastered on the wall. Only one eye hole glared back at them. Even without a mouth, Minato couldn't shake off the feeling that the mask was mockingly grinning at him. The spiraling pattern was motionless, however after some time Minato had to blink to stop the sensation that indeed, it was moving, slowly whirling around its center viciously. The leader shook his head and slowly tapped his brother's shoulder, making him flinch and blink back to reality with a confused expression on his face. This is familiar. Minato stated slowly, watching every emotion on his brother's face. You drew something like this in the book I had given you to test your intelligence. It's something important, isn't it? Naruto looked back at the mask, his expression betraying none of his emotions. Minato was sure that if his eyes weren't so shrouded by his blonde locks he would be able to see everything that was going on inside his relative's thick skull. All emotions would be there, bare and naked. After a short pause, Naruto shook his head and walked away from the stand without a word. Minato wasn't able to hear Naruto's soft whisper. "It is an important reminder." Naruto inhaled and the tension instantly disappeared from his muscles. Minato's frown turned into a scowl as he watched his relative slowly walk away. The moment he passed by Naruto, he almost lost his self-control. He was about to grab his brother's shoulder and shake him while asking, "Why don't you trust me? Why did you feed me the same crap about Orochimaru you fed the council?" But in the end none of that happened. The young leader shrugged off his disappointment and jogged after his brother. With a small slide on the soft dust of the road, Minato arrived next to his relative, gaining the attention of the nearby villagers and earning a raised eyebrow from Naruto. They walked side by side, enjoying the sight of the joyful villagers, the happy families and the laughing children. Naruto's feet unconsciously lead them into the direction of a thin path, the one he trailed countless times during his childhood. Minato took notice of their way, but he said nothing. He instead chose to shadow his relative as they followed the path leading toward the top of the Hokage monument. Naruto didn't even bother himself to look back, he knew perfectly well Minato was following him. They reached the edge of the cliff soundlessly, the two blonde shinobi gracefully hopped down to finally settle down on Minato's own stone statue. Naruto let out a long sigh and glanced up to the dark sky. He couldn't spot any clouds on the ink-black canvas. Only the stars had been sparkling on the sky unperturbedly. "Hey, Toriku." The named blonde slowly turned toward his father, who also locked his azure gaze on the countless number of shining spots above them. 2 days ago, when you were talking about getting your hands on my hat. Were you serious? You really want to be Hokage one day? Minato was lucky he couldn't see the wince of his brother, nor the shadows of guilt currently dulling his gaze as his eyes drifted toward the village at their feet. Nor could he actually know the fact that he was actually speaking to someone who had been named as the Rokudaime Hokage. A young man who had seen the very same living and pulsing village as it was reduced to nothing else than dust and debris. Twice. Even if he actually declined the position back then, Uzumaki Naruto still bore the weight and the guilt of a real Kage for letting his village fall. Gaara's soft, almost murmuring voice trailed inside his mind. When you think your time has come, when you think you are ready to wear the hat, you can replace your Haitayat with your old one. Until that time, you are a shinobi of the allied forces. Naruto's hands unconsciously moved toward his Haitayat to trace over the fine lines of Konoha's symbol on his forehead. His fingers carefully following the swirl in the middle, and when the trail finally ended his hand dropped inside his lap. Konoha is my home. I held her people as close to my heart as I could. I'm clumsy, I can be an idiot sometimes, and I'm also irresponsible. I always just rush bullheaded into the battle without thinking. I'm not even sure I know what the real duties of being the Hokage are. But still. Every time I see you inside the office, I'm jealous. The fourth finally averted his azure pools from the night sky to watch his brother for a long minute, before he answered. You would be a great leader. I already told you that and I don't want to repeat myself. You've got everything in you that you'll need to one day become a great leader. If you're still unsure in yourself, look at the Hokage. He is as hot-headed as you, rude and also punches before he thinks. But he had his brother next to him. I've got Kushina next to me to direct me and guide me through the hindrances I have to face. When your time comes, I will be there by your side to guide you. Naruto stared back with wide and surprised eyes. He hesitantly opened then closed his lips to respond with something, but he couldn't squeeze anything out from his suddenly dry mouth. So instead of desperately trying to push out something coherent, his lips just turned up with the softest smile Minato had ever seen on his face. Real happiness rushed over his form and somehow his chakra shifted into something which reminded Minato of the first real warm sunshine after a long and dark storm. It was sunny and full of life. Even the nature around them somehow seemed to respond. Minato curiously glanced around and noted as the flora somehow rushed to life in the first week of May. A small wildflower next to Naruto, which was strong enough to hold onto a small crack in the stone, flinched and its until now closed bud slowly opened, revealing the soft, orange blossom. Then slowly Naruto's chakra shifted back to its original form. It was still warm as always, it was still full of life and it was still as wild as always. The faint sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts. He glanced up to the edge of the cliff and noted the brilliantly shining crimson hair in the dim light of the stars. Kushina gracefully walked down to them, and more figures followed her silent footsteps. Kakashi trailed after her with a stoic expression on his face, while Rin slowly and carefully took each chakra-infused step on the cliff. Finally Jiraiya landed beside them with the loud thud of his wooden sandals, a wide grin on his face. Before any of them could greet each other, a loud squealing sound echoed over the village, and when it ended with a louder bang, millions of dancing sparkles filled the until now ink-black sky. The faint sound of cheering people reached their battle-hardened ear. The newcomers hastily hopped down next to the two blondes to silently watch the billions of dancing sparkles as they were shimmering down toward the village. The fireworks painted everything soft warm orange, vibrant yellow, vicious red and hundreds of other shades. A harsh string of swearing kicked Naruto out from his reading. He was studying a large and unfortunately very boring, very long and old scroll about space-time ninjutsu he had found in Minato's private library. A weary sigh left his soft lips and he slowly dragged himself toward the next room. Where his mother's voice came from. He found her next to the wall, desperately trying to remove a picture from a broken frame without tearing it. Naruto crouched next to her, carefully avoiding the shards of the broken glass. What happened? It just fell from the wall. I didn't even touch it. Experienced and lean fingers finally slowly pulled out the picture without damaging it. Kushina's green eyes examined the picture with a sentimental glint in her eyes, her soft lips turned up in a warm smile. Naruto curiously peeked at the picture. It was heartbreakingly familiar. The grinning Minato in the middle, surrounded by his genin team. The smiling Rin and the two sulking boys, currently glaring daggers at each other. It was nostalgic and almost the perfect match to his own team picture. The one which was sealed inside his scroll for a long time. His gaze traveled toward the sulking Uchiha and he soon found himself trying to pair the small boy on the picture with the grown, possessed and insane man of his own time. They are reminding you of someone, aren't they? Naruto flung his head toward his mother's soft voice, before he carefully averted his gaze back to the picture. Kushina's soft smile never left her soft features. You can trust me, you know. Naruto slowly nodded, his eyes still carefully avoiding Kushina's own. The kunoichi watched him and in the next second Naruto found himself in her sweet embrace. He could feel her warmth wrapping around him like a soft blanket and he unconsciously leaned into the contact. He didn't answer for a long minute, just enjoying the warm feeling around him. Eagerly swallowing up all the feelings he couldn't have during his childhood. He couldn't even feel or hear as his lips moved and the words slipped out from his mouth uncontrolled. They are like my old team. Naruto winced when Kurama's furious snort echoed inside his mindscape. What the hell are you doing, you moron? But Naruto didn't answer. Instead he tried to burrow himself into the feeling of a soft blanket Kushina offered to him with her arms. What happened to them? Kushina asked curiously, but she didn't miss as Naruto bit down on his lower lip and averted his gaze once again. His mother let out a soft breath and squeezed him a little bit more. I see. Kushina murmured into his ears. I know you've had a harsh past. But if you ever want to talk about it with someone, I'll wait for you. Naruto shook off his frozen state and curiously glanced up at his mother, not really sure what she was referring to. We don't have many precious people. Losing them is the deepest pain someone like us could bear. The blonde furrowed his brow in confusion, but by the next sentence his eyes instantly widened. After all, only Jinchuriki can fully understand each other's pain. Naruto hesitantly opened his mouth, then closed it, while Kushina just giggled at his attempt to squeeze out something coherent. Naruto found himself unable to speak for the second time in a week. The only thing he could do was stare and gape like a fish. Jinchuriki can sometimes feel each other. Didn't you know it? I wasn't aware what the nudging feeling I got every time we were together was, but when you were fighting in the arena I heard you yelling at the small girl. To not give up. To stay strong. To not let the bijou take control over her body. And Kushina slowly brushed a small tuft of blonde hair out from his forehead which escaped under his hitayat. And Minato told me a lot of things. That you know a lot about bijou and Jinchuriki. That you could herd the one-tailed in Suna. That you recognized the bijou in Fu. And you also know the name of the eight-tail. You know things that only a Jinchuriki should know. It wasn't hard to put one and one together. At least not for another Jinchuriki. Naruto hesitantly started. I don't know how to react. You don't have to say anything. Does Minato know about it? Kushina slowly removed her arms around him and slowly lead him away from the shining shards and settled him down on the bed to sit next to him. Azure eyes scanned Emerald One's warily. Do you want him to know about it? Naruto hesitated to answer. But in the end, he shook his head. Then this will be our little secret. Thank you. It was that moment when Naruto felt another presence step into the house. He felt the small wave that rushed through the uncountable amount of security seals as the familiar man passed the doorstep. What are you two doing? Half a minute later Minato's messy blonde head peeked into the room, ruining the precious moment in an instant. Kushina slowly got up from the bed to place a small kiss on his cheek. Just chatting. About what? The Hokage asked curiously, hopping down next to his brother. The redhead glanced toward the pleading eyes of Naruto and let out a small sigh. There was no way she could avert Minato's questions now. Once he found something interesting, there was no way to avert his mind from the topic. The only way was if he received something more interesting to think about. Kushina made one last glance toward the nervously fidgeting young blonde boy before she made her decision. Guess it is actually time to tell you something. Naruto's eyes grew wider and wider, but after Kushina's reassuring glance he finally settled down. However, his previous restless movements were mimicked by none other than Kushina as she nervously started to fidget, shifting her weight from leg to leg, restlessly chewing on her lower lip while she gathered her thoughts on how to actually tell them. Then in the next second a wide grin spread across her face as, instead of beating around the bush, she just blurted out everything with one breath. I'm going to be a mother, Databane. Minato's eyes widened, his mouth had fallen while Naruto's mouth moved into the widest grin he could manage without threatening his face to split in two. He made a side glance to his father next to him, noting the paler and paler features of the fearless Hokage. Minato stared into the empty space in front of him, while his mouth opened and closed continuously, mimicking a fish on dry land. Both of his companions watched him warily as his face slowly got a slight blue tint as he simply forgot how to breathe. Naruto soon started to fear that his father will simply faint next to him. But thankfully the village leader slowly regained some color in his face and some of his composure as he gathered himself at a snail's pace, his mouth opened once again and finally found some words to express his thoughts. However, he failed pitifully. But, how, then I'll. When no coherent words came out from his mouth he just gave up, his mouth closed and a goofy smile spread across his face. It was his brother's laughter which kicked him out from his utter ecstasy and his hard hand which was now tapping his back continuously. How? You really want to ask Jiraiya to tell you the story of where babies come from? A disgusted grimace spread across Kushina's face, but she still made a small hesitant step toward her fiancé, who just sat there silently. Minato? She asked hesitantly. But when the goofy smile spread across his face for the second time, she just mimicked it. I will be a father. And I'm going to be a mother. I will be a father. Then in the next second both of them rushed toward each other to meet in the middle of the room in a sweet embrace. Their hands desperately tried to hug each other as much as possible as they seemed to melt into each other's body to be even closer. Even Naruto could feel the overwhelming love they were currently emitting toward each other. Our time traveler watched with a soft smile on his face as Kushina buried herself even deeper into Minato's chest. He could feel as even the almighty demon fox inside the remains of his seal smiled. He noticed a small soft movement from the corner of his eyes and it kicked him out from his musing. He stared at Minato's gently inviting hand. He slowly raised from the bed, not actually sure that he should disturb their moment. He hesitantly stepped further and further, and when he was just an arm distance, Minato grabbed him and pulled him into the embrace to join them in one of the happiest moments of their lives. They stood like that for long seconds, maybe minutes. But for Naruto, it felt like an eternity. And he hoped that it would never end. He eagerly tried to carve this sweet feeling into the deepest parts of his mind so he could remember this moment forever. A lonely tear slowly slid down his face, painting a thin wet line all the way until it reached his chin. It hesitantly stopped for a second before it dropped down to land on Kushina's arms around him. You will be the best parents a kid could ever wish for. Naruto softly murmured, and he immediately felt as Minato's arms squeezed him a little more, while Kushina's soft voice traveled toward him in a shooting way. And you will be the best uncle Naruto could wish for. Naruto restrained a flinch and closed his eyes for a second. Could he really do this? Could he really drop his real name for the sake of an unborn child? Jealousy raised inside him almost instantly. It glared at him with his glowing green eyes like a monster under a child's bed in the night. This kid, he will get everything he couldn't get in his childhood. This child will have parents. He will have a warm home to return to after school. There will be people to greet him as soon he steps inside. While what did he receive? Pointed glares. A cold and empty apartment. He never had anyone to greet him when he returned after a mission. But suddenly the jealousy was gone as fast as it came. What was he thinking? This boy was him. He slowly shook his head to ease away the last bit of his previous thoughts. A small smile spread across his face, while his eyes sparkled with determination. Yes. He will do everything to make this boy happy. He will do everything to see this Naruto smile carefree, and not because he is wearing a mask of happiness. He will be there, holding his small hand when he takes his first steps. He will be there to give him a shoulder when he needs it. He will be there when Sasuke beats him in one of the academy spars, and he will be there in the front row when he graduates from the academy. He will be there for him as the best uncle or as the best brother a child could wish for. It doesn't matter how, but he will be there for him. Naruto wasn't aware that during these dark and jealous thoughts, all of Kurama's attention was glued on a spot in his mindscape. Naruto wasn't aware that his companion had been intensively watching with a deep frown on his face as a foggy replica of the loud-mouthed blonde slowly materialized inside the remains of the seal. The transparent figure slowly became solid, only the edge of his form remained blurry. Kurama narrowed his eyes even more, his muscles tensing as the edge of Naruto's once pure white eyes slowly became gray. Nor was the blonde teen aware that as his jealousy slowly grew, so did the gray slowly overwhelm the whiteness of his eyes, and the edges were slowly becoming ink black as it moved further and further until it almost touched the edge of his once azure blue pools, which were now also slowly morphing into a crimson tint. The air around him slowly became colder, and Naruto's soft breath soon became visible. Naruto's form suddenly flinched. Kurama finally released his eyes from Naruto's projection for the first time to glance up toward the until now slowly darkening mindscape. There, a small and warm beam stabbed through the dark clouds above their heads. The beam slowly started to grow until the place was once again sunny and warm. Naruto's until now visible breaths faded away as the temperature also rose. Kurama returned his crimson eyes to the transparent boy in front of him. His irises were once again the sparkling blue, shining with the familiar mirth, while the darkness from his sclera retreated and disappeared. Kurama let out a relieved sigh and allowed his muscles to relax. The deep frown was once again on his furry face as he eyed his companion. The fox slowly shook his head to ease away his growing worry. Maybe Itachi was right. I shouldn't have forced him to handle this alone. Kurama softly murmured while he retreated behind one of the giant osier trees, after one last glance at the slowly disappearing mirage. Naruto's muscles tensed until the breaking point. He took one more step, careful not to make any noise. His eyes twitched when, despite how his own movements were flawless, the ancient old floor faintly squeaked under his weight. It wasn't actually loud, it was not even louder than a soft breath, but it was still enough for Naruto to pause. One more step toward his destination and the mission will be accomplished. A minute later, he finally reached his peacefully sleeping target. He ran his Aza pools over the smooth face once more, before he reached down and grabbed the cold handle of his ninja tool from his weapon pouch. His other hand soundlessly opened a small vial and dipped the nib into the ink-black liquid. Naruto let out a long breath, careful to not disturb his victim's sleep. He raised his now armed hand and tensed his muscles, slowly calculating where he would attack first. When he found the perfect spot, a vicious grin spread across his face. Then he striked. A long, thin line appeared on his victim's face after each of the perfect movements. When Naruto finally finished the last stroke, the soft brush and the sealing ink returned to his weapon pouch. Minato was still sleeping and softly snoring, while his head rested on his folded arms, slightly dipped to the side in the middle of the Hokage's office. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face as he examined the perfection of his handiwork. His father was now snoring with 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks. Naruto turned his head toward the puzzled and nervously fidgeting Anbu in the darkness of the corner and sent them a beaming smile. Then he slowly raised his index finger toward his mouth, indicating complete silence from his audience. However, the professionals weren't as professional as he thought, as the youngest Anbu couldn't keep up his calm facade. A muffled snicker escaped behind his squeezed lips, disturbing the complete silence of the office in an instant. Naruto just rolled his eyes and sent an annoyed glare toward the lurking green-horned soldier and shook his head in disapproval. His eyes turned toward his father, who slowly blinked, straightened himself and stretched the aching muscles of his back. Minato let out a loud yawn and rubbed his eyes, before he turned toward his brother. "What are you doing here, Toraku?" Naruto sent a wide grin in response and shrugged. "Nothing. Just fooling around. I'm bored to death. We still got a lot of time before night hits." One of the Anbu cleared his throat, but after one warning glare from his brother, the Hokage's private soldier stilled. In the end, the Anbu shrugged. No harm was done actually, and they also deserve some fun. Minato suspiciously narrowed his eyes after he ran his azure pools over the lurking shinobi. Naruto just stood in the middle of the office while trying to look as innocent as he could. "If you are thinking of pulling a prank on me, you should get it out of your head right now. Nah, you got up too early." But the temptation was strong. Naruto answered with the most innocent eyes he could pull. However, this unnerved the Hokage even more. An innocent-looking Toraku just screams for trouble. A minute later, Toraku was gone and Minato started sweeping through his office for any hidden taps. But he had found no paint bucket above the door, nor above the window. So after wasting half an hour exploring the place for anything suspicious, he just settled down behind his desk. Visitors come and went for a long hour, Chunin and Jounin left after they received their newest mission. However, all of them gave him an odd look before they left. At the end of the day, Minato felt himself squeezed dry. He was paranoid for the last hour, seeing traps and pranks in every corner. And the behavior of every man and woman who stepped inside his office just raised his paranoia. Thankfully, the streets were almost empty until the time he stepped out from the office. He thought for a moment to just use his seals and teleport to his house, but the sweet scent of the night was inviting. So he decided to slowly walk home to enjoy the early May weather. Before he could make any further steps, one of his ANBU appeared next to him, her head carefully bowed. Hokage-sama. Before you go any further, I wish to tell you something. Minato furrowed his brow and nodded toward the shinobi, who instead of answering, warily handed over a small mirror. Minato made a confused expression, glancing from the mirror toward the woman in the mask for a hesitant minute. He felt his cheeks slowly turn bright red as somewhere deep in his mind he realized that he was actually pranked by none other than his brother. The Hokage slowly opened the small pocket mirror and glanced toward his reflection. He dimly noted the 3 identical whisker marks on each of his cheeks. He slowly closed the pocket mirror and the ANBU immediately retreated into the shadows, fearing that her leader would take out some of his frustration on her. But she had to admit, it was fun. It was utterly wrong, and shameful for them to let the Hokage be pranked, but still. However, to her surprise, instead of bursting out in anger, Namake's Minato started to laugh. There was nothing that could ruin his mood. Tomorrow will be a special day after all. Tomorrow, he will officially be a married man. But before that happens, he has to face a bunch of excited males. And he feared what his perverted sensei had in store for him. Hopefully Kushina won't castrate him for any of it. Muffled laughs and loud yells could be heard behind a thick wooden door. A rusty, metal sign hung lazily above it, shouting away the name of the place. The Rusty Shuriken was a popular place for shinobi to rest after a long mission or to just come along and pour down some sake to oil their sore throats. The place was always crowded, however this time there were only a bunch of males sitting around a table in the middle of the bar. The board slumped under the massive amount of sturdy empty cups and bottles the small bunch had already inhaled down their throats. 2 ANBU had been lurking under the shadows of the corners, but their always stoic faces were now curled up in a small smile under the ice-cold surface of the porcelain mask. Jiraiya raised from his chair and cleared his throat, while raising his cup of sake high into the air. His cheeks were already much redder than usual and his words slurred by the amount of alcohol he already poured down his throat. To the end of freedom of our fearless blonde Hokage. Hopefully you'll enjoy this sweet captivity for a long, long time. And Jiraiya emptied his cup in one swig, and slumped down into his chair with a goofy, but altogether satisfied smile on his face. A soft smile spread across the named blonde leader's flushed face and Minato carefully sipped from his own glass. Even if he had been careful to not drink as much as his teacher, he could already feel the slight effects of the alcohol. His words faltered from time to time, and an invisible power also started to tug his head from the side, not in an irritating way, but a pleasant one. The widely grinning sage suddenly found a new target for entertainment. Jiraiya lumberly stood up to sway to the other end of the table and drop himself between Naruto and Kakashi. You seem too normal. Are you drinking correctly? You know, it's a day when everything is allowed. Hey! Kakashi is still underaged. He can't drink. Jiraiya waved a hand to the displeased Minato and continued with the same grin plastered on his features, his face only centimeters from Naruto. The blonde's face scrunched up in a displeased expression as the toad summoner's sour breath hit him harder than an actual kick. However, he didn't have time to voice it, as Jiraiya flung an arm around the blonde's shoulder. I know, extreme healing and all, but I bet I can win a drinking competition against any of you. The blonde lazily raised his brow and a smug smile spread across his face. You want a drinking competition? You picked the wrong guy, you know. I can drink sake all day and I won't even sway. Naruto sent a cheeky smirk. Wanna bet? The smug smile on Naruto's face widened into a foxy and cunning grin. The next second Naruto blinked, he found a cup of sake in his hand and Jiraiya already raised his own. I don't think that is a good idea. Minato shook his head in his displeasure, eyeing his own cup of sake with an askance look on his fine features. Kushina is going to skin me for this. Then the deal is up. Jiraiya hopped to his feet and the competition started. The foxy grin never left Naruto's face, however he wasn't aware that his never-missing fluffy companion had the same cunning expression on his own furry face. I'm going to enjoy this so much. Let's see how you'll handle this by yourself. An hour later, Minato's voice stumbled from time to time as his tongue couldn't really follow his attempts at speech. Jiraiya carefully pushed a thick notebook into Kakashi's hands with a proud expression and with a loud, "It's finished," and somehow the teen disappeared to the back of the bar after he had finished reading the first page. The blonde time traveler let out a barking laugh as soon as he spotted the flaming red skin on his Suntobe-sensei's ears. Naruto felt funny. He was carefree, his head slightly swayed more and more with each passing minute, and with each cup of sake, the dam that had been restraining his actions was becoming weaker and weaker. His own voice faltered from time to time and the always fine and clear line between reality and the now dreamlike world slowly started to smudge for Naruto. The world suddenly dangerously tilted and he even grasped hard the edge of the thick wooden table. Naruto soundlessly slipped down from his chair, to land with a loud thud on the hard floor. He laid there in an awkward position, too weary to even try to untie his rumpled limbs. But somehow his embarrassing position wasn't bothering him at all, since the cold floor felt really good against his temple. Warm hands slipped under his armpits to carefully lift him. However, when he finally got the power to station his limbs under him, Jiraiya's arms weren't there to give him any more support. So he almost slumped once more. Though thankfully he didn't hit the ground this time. His father caught him just in time. "Come on, Otuto. I think you've drank enough. You are mean. Just 5 more minutes. Come, the bed is more comfortable." Stupid Kakashi-sensei. Minato's lips curved up into a wide grin. "Sensei, huh?" An unrecognizable sound escaped from Naruto's soft lips, but it still sounded like a cheeky retort. Minato shook his head and quickly left before Jiraiya could protest or any more idiotic ideas could pop into his head, dragging his half-conscious relative toward their house. He had no doubt that he would mess up the whole house if he used his Hiraishin with him in this state. It was a long way home, with his brother's continuous incoherent mumbling. A lurking Anbu hopped down from the roof when he spotted his leader slightly swaying home with his brother on his back. "Hokage-sama. Ero-sanin, I don't wanna train." Naruto mumbled softly into Minato's neck and snorted before his eyelids were closed again and started to loudly snore. Minato shot his soldier a beaming smile, his cheeks were still flushed from the amount of alcohol he tucked down his throat, then he stumbled to the side. Only the wall of the building next to him kept him from falling face down with his brother on his back. After 10 more minutes, desperately trying to get into the house, he finally laid down his snoring brother to his bed. He was about to leave the room, when his brother started to fidget under his blanket. "Nah. I am glad you are here, and I love you guys so much. I'm glad you're here too. And I know that already, you idiot." Minato answered softly, however his brother was already asleep. "Again. I hate you." Naruto growled, and grimaced at his image in the mirror inside the bathroom, while he was desperately trying to force his mess of sun-kissed hair into a decent form. His temples were throbbing and his stomach was still whirling with the vehemence of his own name. His throat was drier than the deserts of Suna, while his white eyeballs were red all over. Kurama was obviously on strike and not letting even a droplet of his chakra into Naruto's system to wash out his terrible hangover. "Why did you do this to me?" For fun, what else? Kurama yawned and fidgeted to get a better place to lay down for a nap. However, his furious Jinchuriki appeared inside his mindscape, with hands on his hips and leaning inside Kurama's private space, which was quite the feat, doing this to a giant demon fox. Like you do anything without reason. Azure Eyes sent another set of imaginary daggers through Kurama's orbs, but Naruto's attempt to look threatening miserably failed as his headache returned with a force he could feel even in his mindscape. His face scrunched up in pain and a pitiful groan escaped from his lips as he grabbed his temple to try and shoot away his throbbing headache. Pretty please. I'll do whatever you want, but I can't live through this day like this. Kurama eyed his company with a raised eyebrow for a never-ending second before he shrugged. Guess I can take care of that. You would be a pain in the ass if you started whining like a 5-year-old girl. The fox wanted to tease him more, but another blonde crow sneaked a peek inside the slightly open bathroom door and Naruto immediately retreated back to reality. With one last sigh, Kurama let down the dam and healing chakra started to flow slowly inside the blonde's chakra coils. Not enough to be detected, but it was still enough to shake back his jailer into a decent form. Are you ready, Ototo? It's time to go. Naruto let out a pleased sigh as soon as his headache retreated and nodded. In the next blink, they were gone with the speed of the Hiraishin, to reappear at the other side of the village for a very special ceremony. Minato's long black haori ruffled in the soft breeze, his azure eyes peered into emerald ones. His always messy blonde hair freely danced in the soft wind. He left his Hitayat and his Hokage hat to rest in the office. He was just an ordinary man in this moment and not the feared village leader. And it was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. He gently reached for Kushina's hand and squeezed it a little. She looked beautiful. Not even Kushina's slightly rounding tummy ruined her perfection, it just made her more beautiful than ever. Her vibrant red hair freely flowed over the pure white kimono, a single small white kanzashi restraining her hair. The jewelry tinkled from time to time as she moved her face to look over the gathered people. It was their wedding day and not even the weather seemed to interfere in it. Would Mother Nature dare to ruin it, she'd have to face Kushina's wrath. Even if the hot-blooded Kunoichi couldn't do anything against Mother Nature, there was a bet going on in the lines of the attendees that she would at least try to go against her if she sent a rainstorm on this precious day. The ceremony was short and simple, nothing fancy. What actually mattered is the happiness on their faces, brightening them up from head to toe as the newest official couple of Konoha were stealing quick glances and kisses every time they got the opportunity for it. Naruto watched Jiraiya form the corner of his eyes as he was staring at the two lovebirds. His hands had been clinging around the same cup of sake for the last half hour, his eyes were hazy and foggy like he saw something or someone else instead of Minato and Kushina for a long time. Then his vision cleared again and locked on the laughing happy pair. The blonde couldn't help himself. He let out a small chuckle when a small tear slid down the toad summoner's face. His godfather grunted in his annoyance and immediately wiped away the small droplet before it could leave his chin. Shut up, Gaki. You're crying too. Jiraiya mumbled, but his face moved into a soft smile as he watched as his student finally slowly lead away his wife to get some privacy. Naruto hesitantly raised his hand to wipe away the sweat tears of happiness from his face. But he couldn't. They just continued to flow and he eventually gave up the fight against them. So he just let them flow freely while he laughed. He laughed as real happiness flushed him from head to toe. Naruto softly hummed the rhythm he still remembered from the wedding. The blonde sat under a giant tree, his back firmly resting against his temporary teacher, enjoying the first warm beams of the early summer, which promised a real hot wave in weeks. Jiraiya turned a page in his notes, his experienced fingers already scribbling down the fine and precise kanji. Naruto suddenly stopped humming. You should speak to her. Jiraiya didn't stop writing and raised an eyebrow. To whom? To the girl you were thinking about during the wedding. Jiraiya let out a snort and shook his head. Let me say something to you, Gaki. My love life is private. And it's platonic. There is no way she would. Jiraiya suddenly stopped and bit down on his lips, not aware of Naruto's searching blue eyes behind him. You should tell her, or you may never have a chance. People don't live forever. Why? You didn't get the chance to declare your love to your own woman or something? Jiraiya could feel as the boy's muscles tense in his back. Then he could feel as his muscles slowly relaxed and the boy leaned a little more backward, maybe to seek some comfort or encouragement. No. It was my Shursho. Naruto hesitantly stated. And somehow, this time Kurama only narrowed his eyes inside his mindscape. Jiraiya moved his eyes to the side, to at least catch a glimpse of the teen, eagerly waiting for the blonde to continue. But after a long wait, he didn't continue and soon the Toad Sage started to lose hope that he will actually know something more from his past. So the Toad Summoner let out a long sigh before he opened his mouth. I see. Well, I won't be dying anytime soon, so I guess I've got a lot of time. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but he immediately closed it. He just stared at him, silently waiting for Jiraiya's next step. And surprisingly Kurama was still silent inside him. There was no shouting, no swearing, nothing at all. The ancient old giant demon fox silently observed his jailer's every move. Some weight disappeared from his shoulder as soon as the words slipped from his lips. He felt relieved when Jiraiya didn't start to dig deeper, and he was thankful for it. Especially since he knew that the old sage could be like a small child when something interesting happened. Almost jumping up and down in excitement. But the Toad Summoner just stayed in silence. Enjoying the warm sun, and the dancing shadows of the leaves as they were painting abstract forms on them. If Minato and Kushina weren't there next to him, Naruto would have jumped up and down in excitement. They casually strolled toward their destination on the streets of Konoha. They had been heading to the Uchiha compound. A wide grin had been plastered on Naruto's face ever since Minato told them that the whole Namake's family had been invited for dinner. Naruto casually waved his greeting to the guards at the thick wooden gates of the compound, and the stunned shinobi hesitantly mimicked the hail with a small nod toward the blonde and with a low bow to Minato. A merchandise cart left by their side, and it made Naruto send a beaming smile towards the civilian. The clan had been slowly opening up toward the village. He never thought it would be successful, but it was. The walls were still around the compound. You can't just bulldoze down decades of tradition. But at least the gates weren't closed anymore. Even the people were more open toward the others. First the merchants came to sell their goods, and then with small steps, more and more citizens of Konoha ventured to take a look around the place. Children started to create bonds with other clans as they were able to move more freely within the field of the clan and with the children. The families also started to seek for other people's company other than the clan members. It will be a long way until he will be able to spot mixed lovebirds, but he could feel that the time was not as far off as he first imagined. They casually walked on the wide and tidy streets until they reached a small wooden fence. But it wasn't closed as Naruto could remember during his childhood, especially when he once or twice sneaked inside the compound. It was wide open, so this time he could see the tidy garden at the other side of the fence. Naruto hesitantly stepped over the doorstep only to find himself facing a small child. He unconsciously made a gulp as he immediately recognized the small boy in front of him. The boy made a deep bow. Hokage-sama, Uzumaki-sama. My parents are waiting for you inside the house. Naruto winced at the formal tone of the small child, but his concern was shoved to the side when the obsidian orbs finally turned toward him. Eyes far too intelligent for a 5-year-old child observed him carefully. Kushina made a curious glance to her frozen brother-in-law and gently pushed him further. Come on, he's just a child. He won't bite off your head. Naruto made a sour grimace, but after a second it was replaced with a wide toothy grin. He held out a hand toward the child. Hi. My name is Namikaze Toraku. Glad to meet you. The child curiously observed the offered hand for a long moment, then he slowly grabbed it to shake it. Uchiha Itachi. Glad to meet you, Namikaze-sama. Naruto scrunched his nose in displeasure and leaned closer to the child. Can I ask you a favor? Itachi raised an eyebrow and nodded. Stop calling me Namikaze-sama. It makes me feel old. I'm Toraku. So call me that, please. Just Toraku. Itachi nodded again. Torokusan, but he couldn't finish it when Naruto grunted. Torakusan, Itachi slowly amended. Obsidian eyes bored into sunny blue ones, until a smile spread across Itachi's face, making the two lines under his eyes a little deeper. My parents are inside. Itachi tugged the hand he was still holding, and the 5-year-old child simply led him further into the house like that. Kushina silently watched from the background as Itachi led away her relative. She let out a disappointed sigh. I wish that I'll be able to handle kids as good as him. But I'm still happy to see Itachi smile. The last time I saw him. Kushina slowly shook her head. He's seen too much for a child to see. Minato reached out and gently grabbed her hand. You will be a great mother. Come. Let's not make Fugaku and Mikoto wait. Kushina sent back a beaming smile, and they silently strolled after Itachi and the still grinning Naruto, watching as the two boys chatted. One too old for his age, and one too childish for his own. Naruto was the first one to step into the traditional Japanese house. Itachi led him further into the dining room where the clan head was waiting. Fugaku's dark eyes observed him, a little longer than was actually well-mannered, before he finally greeted the teen. Torakukan. I don't think you've ever met my wife before. Naruto turned his head toward the door where a lean, dark-haired woman stepped further into the dining room. Naruto restrained the urge to immediately look toward her obviously round tummy. Mikoto stepped closer with a soft smile on her face, and after the introductions and finally Minato and Kushina also arrived, Naruto couldn't endure the urge. He glanced down to Mikoto's round tummy and an unconscious smile spread across his face. However, that moment didn't last too long. Kushina rushed next to her and his mother immediately started talking and asking a long chain of questions. Naruto slowly shook his head and settled down next to his grinning father at the table. Minato sent one last smirk toward the kitchen where he could still hear Kushina's muffled voice. Leave them alone. I have a feeling that Mikoto won't be free for some time. And he was right. Kushina released Mikoto after 15 minutes had passed, and only because the woman protested that she had to prepare the lunch. However, Kushina was more than eager to help her out while still shooting random questions at her about pregnancy while they were busy taking in the plates filled with delicious-looking food. Thankfully, when Kushina finally received answers for all of her question, the table was made so Mikoto could finally take a seat next to her husband with bright red cheeks. Surely Kushina embarrassed her to death with all of her blunt and shameless questions about her pregnancy. Minato just softly smiled at the scene. However, Mikoto was really far from being Kushina's best friend or altogether far from even calling her a friend. But Kushina in some manners was the same as his brother, she also had the ability to influence people around her. Even if only on a much smaller level, the ability was still there. 15 minutes ago Mikoto acted like a stranger around the redhead, but after she was under her charm, the distance between them slowly shrunk until there was only a thin, almost invisible line between them. The dinner, thankfully, went in a normal way. Well, at least normal in the norms of Minato. Living together with the red hot-blooded habanero and his brother was actually very far from normal. Two lively, hot-tempered people under one roof was just screaming for trouble, but also for fun. Naruto stretched his arms and let out a loud yawn, much to Fugaku's displeasure. The obsidian eyes flashed for a second and the clan head scrunched up his nose when the blond boy scratched his round tummy. Mikatosan, that was just fantastic. The woman hid her satisfied smile with one of her graceful hands, but the small blush on her cheeks still said 1,000 words. Naruto soon became restless as his hands and mouth weren't occupied anymore. The teen first started to fidget restlessly in the peaceful silence while Mikoto disappeared with the dishes, Kushina on her heels. Minato enjoyed the silence even as he was aware of his brother's continuous fidgeting. He leisurely cupped his steaming tea and only drank small sips from the sour liquid. The house was strangely quiet, only the fauna made their appearance known as a lonely Seata found its place on the wooden sill under the open window. It was an early bloomer, most likely the first of its kind, but it still shouted out to the whole world that summer is coming. The Hokage and his brother silently listened together with Fugaku and Itachi as the summer's first prophet started to sing its sonata. However, the sweet sonata was soon disturbed by Toraku. "Hey Itachi-kun. Do you think you could show me around? I've never been here before." A sarcastic snort echoed inside his mindscape. "Yeah. And I'm a cute little kit. You want a hug or something?" Kurama scrunched up his nose in displeasure. "Now way in hell I'll let you hug me. A shame. You must be all soft and fluffy." "Toraku-san, are you a shinobi?" Itachi's question came from thin air, immediately kicking out Naruto from his starting bickering with Kurama. The blonde blinked and scratched the back of his head. "Well, yeah. And I'm a strong one." That was the understatement of the year, brat. Naruto ignored the fox and instead glanced down at the curiously shining black eyes with a smirk on his face. "Hey Itachi-kun, do you want to play ninja?" A smile spread across Minato's face, while Fugaku slowly raised an eyebrow in a questioning manner. Midnight Black Eyes observed the grinning teen at the other side of the table, trying to figure out what was happening inside that thick head. However, he couldn't find any answer. "So? You wanna play?" Naruto quirked a questioning eyebrow. The small child reconsidered it for a second, before he slowly nodded. The duo departed from the room without any further comments or even a glance backwards. However, they were followed by a pair of black eyes. Fugaku slowly shook his head and glanced toward the grinning Hokage. Why would a grown-up ninja want to play ninja with a child? Minato shrugged and sipped from his tea. However, in the next moment his grin was nowhere to be seen. His face became serious, but his eyes still sparkled with curiosity. "So how is our little project doing?" Minato asked, his hand still cupped around a steaming mug of tea, watching as the steam slowly contorted into abstract form in the motionless air. Fugaku glanced back immediately, his form straightened in his seat. "I have to say, it went better than I first thought. The elders are pleased with the new advisory body and the murmurs about the coup are at ease. They weren't too pleased with the new entries in the police force, but seeing the positive progress they came to terms with it." "How many new recruits joined your side?" 10, Fugaku answered, casually sipping from his seat. 5 are from the other clans. I even got a Yamanaka. He's quite helpful during interrogations." "That's good." Minato smiled as he looked inside his mug. "And I also got a green-horned civilian now, thanks to you." Fugaku made a sour grimace and refilled his empty mug. "A civilian?" Minato raised an eyebrow and gestured towards the clan head, requesting a fill-up. "I gave him some administration duties. He will be okay. He was jumpy during the first week, but he's adapting quite quickly." Minato raised an eyebrow and glanced towards the open window where Naruto's soft laugh twisted inside. However, his attention was glued on another slowly approaching presence. They didn't have to wait for long as a familiar mop of untidy black hair stuck his head inside the room. "Fugaku-sama, I." There was a pause before the newcomer collected himself. "Hokage-sama, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had guests. Itachi is outside. Fugaku gestured towards the back entrance. The team made a bow to each man and quickly retreated from the piercing azure blue eyes and the questioning frown on Minato's face. He and my son have a long history together. Fugaku answered the unasked question. Shursui was his first babysitter when he was a toddler, and now he's tutoring Itachi almost every second night. Itachi is more grown up than you would think. Minato didn't answer, he just made one hesitant nod, before they continued with their chat. Naruto unconsciously tensed as a new presence stepped inside the backyard. The soft footsteps made no noise for a normal shinobi, but the blonde could still hear crystal clear, the soft noise of the soul as it connected with the soft dust, and he could also hear as restrained shinobi clothes rustled slightly by each and every movement the ninja made. He glanced over his shoulder to sneak a peek at the newcomer, who suddenly stopped in his pace as he also spotted the blonde head next to Itachi, who was busy burying his shuriken into a training buddy. Hey, did you see that? Naruto glanced down at the smiling boy and patted his head when he noted the shuriken in the middle of the bull's eye. That was a nice throw, Itachi-kun. The newcomer stated with a soft smile on his face, and the small child immediately lit up and ran towards the man. Shisui Zensei. Naruto's eyes widened, while the boy slowly approached the frozen blonde. Shursui? This boy is Uchiha Shursui? I thought he was supposed to be about Itachi's age. The young teen made a polite bow as soon as they reached him. I don't think we've met before. My name is Uchiha Shursui. Naruto hesitantly made a bow. Namikaze Toraku. The two boys stared at each other, or most likely Naruto just stared, and Shursui furrowed his brow under the weight of the azure eyes, while the young Itachi slowly started to fidget from foot to foot under the sudden tension in the air. However, it was washed away in the next blink as a wide grin spread across Naruto's face. We were playing ninja. Do you want to join us? A dark figure occupied his seat behind a wooden desk, under the roots of Konoha, deep under the city's pulsing surface, deeper than the sewers or the hidden and already forgotten catacombs of the ancient old city. The man was tense beyond words, tense because he was making a decision. His eyes were narrowed and locked onto the darkness of a corner in front of him, while the gears in his brain were moving and calculating. Then suddenly he found his answer. With one flick of his hand, an ANBU appeared from somewhere in the shadows in front of the desk to land in a crouch. Danzu-sama. Tell Crow that I have a new mission for him. The soldier nodded and disappeared in an instant. The room was silent, only the man's soft breathing left behind some noise. However, he wasn't alone, as another voice filled the room in the next second. You've made the right decision. I'll seek you out again soon. A candle flickered, and for a short moment, no longer than a heartbeat, the light revealed another form in the dark corner. A mismatched face. One emerald eye on perfect smooth white skin. While the other part of the face looked like carved wood, or the roots of an ancient old tree. But not the living and pulsing wood, it was pale and looked more like death than an actual corpse. A satisfied smirk flickered on the face of the being, revealing a set of razor-sharp shark-like teeth for a brief moment, before the thing simply sank back into the wall behind him. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.